The morning sun barely touched the windows of St. Mary's General Hospital when Dr. Richard Walsh stormed through the emergency department doors. His expensive leather shoes clicked against the polished floor with each hurried step. Behind him, two men in dark suits followed closely, their faces stern and focused. Sarah Martinez had been a patient in room 314 for 3 weeks now. The 32-year-old nurse had been admitted after a terrible car accident that left her with multiple injuries. But her recovery had been slow, and more concerning to some people, she had been asking too many questions about things that happened before her accident. Dr. Walsh was not Sarah's primary doctor. In fact, he rarely worked with accident victims. He specialized in psychiatric cases and had a reputation for being efficient at moving patients through the system quickly. Today, he carried discharge papers with his signature already on them. "Nurse Peterson," Dr. Walsh called to the young woman behind the nurse's station, "I need to see the patient in room 314 immediately." Jenny Peterson looked up from her computer screen, confused. "Dr. Walsh, but Sarah Martinez is under Dr. Thompson's care. Shouldn't you speak with him first?" "Dr. Thompson is unavailable," Walsh replied curtly. "I'm handling this case now. Please escort me to the room." Jenny felt uncomfortable, but Dr. Walsh was a senior physician. She led him down the hallway, the two suited men still following behind. Other nurses and hospital staff noticed the unusual procession but continued with their work, assuming it was official business. In room 314, Sarah was sitting up in bed reading a newspaper. Her left arm was still in a cast, and she had bandages on her face, but her mind was sharp and clear. She had been thinking about the night of her accident, trying to remember details that seemed important, but remained just out of reach. "Ms. Martinez," Dr. Walsh said as he entered the room. "I'm Dr. Walsh. I have some good news for you. We're discharging you today." Sarah looked surprised. "Today? But Dr. Thompson said I needed at least another week of observation, and my physical therapy isn't finished yet." "Medical opinions can change," Walsh said, pulling out the discharge papers. "Your condition has improved significantly. You're ready to go home." But Sarah had been a nurse for 8 years before her accident. She knew hospital procedures, and something felt wrong about this situation. "I'd like to speak with Dr. Thompson first. And who are these men with you?" "They're here to help with your transportation," Walsh said, his patience clearly running thin. "Now, if you'll just sign these papers, we can get you processed and on your way." The two men moved closer to the bed. They hadn't spoken a word since arriving, but their presence felt threatening. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. Her memory might be unclear about the accident, but her instincts as a nurse were telling her something was very wrong. "I'm not signing anything until I speak with my doctor," Sarah said firmly. "And I want to know who ordered this discharge." Dr. Walsh's face darkened. "Ms. Martinez, you're being difficult. These gentlemen are here to ensure your safe transport home. Now please, sign the papers." Jenny Peterson, who had been quietly standing in the doorway, finally spoke up. "Dr. Walsh, I really think we should wait for Dr. Thompson. This doesn't seem right." "Nurse Peterson, you're dismissed," Walsh snapped. "This is a medical decision and it's final." But Jenny had worked at St. Mary's for 5 years. She knew all the doctors and their specialties. She also knew that psychiatric doctors didn't typically handle accident patients, especially not with mysterious men in suits. Instead of leaving, she stepped back into the hallway and quickly called Dr. Thompson's office. Meanwhile, in the room, the situation was becoming more tense. One of the suited men moved to the other side of Sarah's bed, effectively trapping her. "Ma'am, we really need you to come with us now," he said in a low voice. Sarah's training kicked in. She reached for the call button, but the other man was faster. He grabbed her wrist not violently, but firmly enough to stop her. "Let go of me," Sarah said loudly. "Nurse, I need help in here." Dr. Walsh moved to close the door, but Jenny Peterson was already running back down the hallway. She had reached Dr. Thompson, and he was furious. He told her to call security immediately and that he was on his way to the hospital. "Security to room 314, Jenny announced over the hospital's intercom system. "Security to room 314, emergency." The announcement echoed through the hospital corridors. Dr. Walsh cursed under his breath. This was not going according to plan. "We need to move now," he told the two men, but Sarah was not going quietly. Despite her injuries, she was fighting back. "Help! Someone help me!" she screamed. "These people are trying to kidnap me!" Her shouts attracted the attention of other patients and visitors in nearby rooms. Soon, several people were looking out their doors to see what was happening. The commotion was drawing exactly the kind of attention that Dr. Walsh and his companions had wanted to avoid. Hospital security guards were already running toward room 314 when Dr. Thompson burst through the main entrance of the hospital. He had driven from his home in record time, breaking several speed limits along the way. He knew Sarah Martinez's case well, and there was absolutely no medical reason for her to be discharged today. In fact, Dr. Thompson had been worried about Sarah for reasons that had nothing to do with her physical injuries. 3 weeks ago, before her accident, Sarah had come to him privately with concerns about something she had witnessed at the hospital. She had seen something that troubled her deeply, something involving certain patients and falsified medical records. Dr. Thompson had advised her to report what she saw to the hospital administration, but Sarah had wanted to gather more evidence first. The very next night, she had her terrible car accident. The timing had always seemed suspicious to Dr. Thompson, but he had tried to convince himself it was just a coincidence. Now, seeing Dr. Walsh attempting to forcibly remove Sarah from the hospital, Dr. Thompson realized his worst fears might be true. Sarah hadn't had an accident at all. She had been targeted because of what she knew. The security guards reached room 314 just as Dr. Thompson arrived. They found Dr. Walsh and the two men trying to physically move Sarah from her bed to a wheelchair, despite her protests and attempts to resist. "Stop right there," shouted Chief Security Officer Mike Rodriguez. "Nobody move!" Dr. Walsh tried to maintain his authority. "Officer Rodriguez, I'm discharging this patient. These men are here to transport her home. There's no problem here." But Dr. Thompson pushed past the security guards. "There's a huge problem here, Walsh. This patient is under my care, and I never authorized any discharge. Sarah, are you okay?" Sarah was shaken, but relieved to see Dr. Thompson. "They were trying to force me to leave. They wouldn't let me call you or anyone else. Dr. Thompson, I think this is about what I told you before my accident." The room fell silent. The two suited men looked at Dr. Walsh, clearly waiting for instructions. Dr. Walsh's face was pale, and sweat was forming on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "I don't know what she's talking about," Walsh said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I was simply following orders from the administration to free up bed space." "What orders?" Dr. Thompson demanded. "Show me the paperwork. Show me who authorized this." Dr. Walsh fumbled with the discharge papers, but Dr. Thompson snatched them from his hands. As he read them, his expression grew darker. "These papers are fake," he announced. "The administrator's signature is forged, and the medical justification is completely false." Security Officer Rodriguez immediately called for backup and contacted the police. The two suited men tried to leave quietly, but more security guards had arrived and blocked the exits from the floor. "Nobody leaves until the police get here," Rodriguez announced. But the situation was about to become much more complicated. Through the window of room 314, which faced the hospital's helicopter landing pad, they could all see something that made everyone freeze. A military Black Hawk helicopter was descending toward the hospital roof. The powerful aircraft landed with a thunderous noise that shook the entire building. Hospital staff and patients throughout the facility stopped what they were doing to stare out windows at the unexpected arrival. Dr. Walsh's face went white. One of the suited men pulled out a cell phone and made a quick call. speaking in urgent, hushed tones. Whatever was happening, the arrival of the military helicopter had changed everything. "What is that about?" Jenny Peterson whispered to Dr. Thompson. "I don't know," he replied, "but I have a feeling we're about to find out." Sarah stared out the window at the Black Hawk helicopter, her mind racing. Slowly, pieces of her memory from before the accident began to come together. She remembered now what she had seen that night 3 weeks ago. She remembered the files she had discovered, the patients who weren't really patients, and the secret medical procedures that were happening after normal hospital hours. Most importantly, she remembered who had seen her looking at those files that night, and she realized that her car accident had been no accident at all. The Black Hawk helicopter sat silently on the hospital roof, its rotors slowly spinning to a stop. Whatever was about to happen next would determine not just Sarah's fate, but possibly the fate of everyone in room 314. Dr. Thompson looked at Sarah's face and saw the recognition there. "You remember something, don't you?" he said quietly. Sarah nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I remember everything, and I think that helicopter is here because of what I know." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Outside, they could hear the sound of boots on the hospital roof, heavy footsteps that suggested armed personnel had arrived with the helicopter. Dr. Walsh was now visibly shaking. Whatever plan he had been part of was falling apart, and the arrival of the military aircraft suggested that the stakes were much higher than anyone had imagined. "We need to get Sarah out of here," Dr. Thompson said to Security Officer Rodriguez. "I don't think she's safe." But as they prepared to move her, the lights in the hallway suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Through the hospital's communication system, a voice announced, "All hospital personnel and visitors must remain in their current locations. This facility is now under federal investigation." Sarah grabbed Dr. Thompson's arm. "They're not here to hurt me," she realized suddenly. "They're here to protect me. Someone must have gotten my message." "What message?" Dr. Thompson asked. "Before my accident, I managed to send evidence to a friend who works for the government. I never knew if it got through because of the accident, but—" She gestured toward the window and the Black Hawk helicopter. "I think it did." The sound of footsteps in the hallway was getting closer, but these weren't the uncertain footsteps of confused hospital staff. These were the confident, measured steps of people who knew exactly what they were doing and where they were going. Dr. Walsh made one last desperate attempt to leave the room, but Security Officer Rodriguez blocked his path. "You're not going anywhere, Doctor. Not until we figure out exactly what's been going on here." The footsteps stopped right outside room 314. Sarah held her breath, not knowing whether the people about to enter would be her salvation or her doom. But as the door opened and armed federal agents entered the room, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. The nightmare that had started with her accident 3 weeks ago was finally about to end. But the full truth of what had been happening at St. Mary's Hospital was just beginning to be revealed. Special Agent Maria Gonzalez stepped into room 314 with the confidence of someone who had been planning this moment for weeks. Behind her, 3 more federal agents entered, their weapons holstered but ready. They wore tactical gear with FBI clearly marked on their vests. "Dr. Walsh, you're under arrest for conspiracy, kidnapping, and medical fraud," Agent Gonzalez announced, nodding to one of her team members, who immediately moved to handcuff the trembling doctor. The 2 suited men who had been with Walsh tried to protest, claiming they were just transportation personnel, but Agent Gonzalez wasn't buying it. "Mr. Chen and Mr. Rodriguez, you're also under arrest as accomplices. You have the right to remain silent." As she read them their rights, Dr. Thompson and the hospital security staff watched in amazement. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and vindication. After weeks of feeling like she was going crazy, Wondering if her memories were real, she finally had proof that everything she remembered was true. "Miss Martinez," Agent Gonzalez said, turning to Sarah after the arrests were complete. "I'm Special Agent Gonzalez with the FBI. I believe you have some information that's very important to our investigation." Sarah nodded, but she was still cautious. "How do I know you're really FBI? After what just happened, I'm not trusting anyone easily." Agent Gonzalez smiled understandingly and showed Sarah her credentials. Then she pulled out her phone and showed her a photo. "Does this look familiar?" On the screen was a copy of the same document that Sarah had photographed and sent to her friend Marcus 3 weeks ago. It was a medical record showing fake treatments being given to patients who were actually government informants in a witness protection program. "Marcus Chen works for the Department of Justice," Agent Gonzalez explained. "When he received your message with these documents, he immediately forwarded them to us. We've been building a case against this operation for the past 3 weeks. Dr. Thompson looked confused. "I don't understand. What operation? What's been happening at my hospital?" Agent Gonzalez looked around the room to make sure it was secure, then closed the door. "Dr. Thompson, with respect, it hasn't been your hospital entirely. For the past 2 years, certain people have been using St. Mary's as a front for a very dangerous operation." She pulled out a tablet and showed them a complex organizational chart. Dr. Walsh was part of a network that was selling information about witnesses in federal protection programs. They would admit these witnesses as fake patients, gather information about their new identities, and then sell that information to criminal organizations who wanted to find them. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. "You mean the people I saw weren't really patients at all?" "Some were," Agent Gonzalez confirmed. "But others were witnesses who thought they were getting routine medical care in a safe location. Instead, their personal information was being collected and sold to the very criminals they were hiding from." The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Dr. Thompson sat down heavily in the visitor's chair, trying to process what he was hearing. "How many people are we talking about?" "At least 30 witnesses over the past 2 years, Agent Gonzalez replied. 3 of them are now dead because their locations were compromised. That's why we had to act so quickly when we got Sarah's evidence." Jenny Peterson, who had been quietly listening from the doorway, gasped. "That's why those patients always seemed different. They never had family visitors, and they always paid in cash." Agent Gonzalez nodded. "You're very observant, Nurse Peterson. We'd like to interview you as well about what you might have noticed." Meanwhile, outside the window, the Black Hawk helicopter was still positioned on the roof. Agent Gonzalez explained that it had brought additional federal agents and equipment needed to secure the hospital and gather evidence. "We've been watching Dr. Walsh for weeks," she continued. "We knew he would eventually try to silence Sarah, either by discrediting her as mentally unstable or by removing her from the hospital entirely. When our surveillance team saw him arrive this morning with those 2 men, we knew we had to move immediately." Sarah realized how close she had come to disappearing completely. "If Nurse Peterson hadn't called security when she did, you might not be here right now," Agent Gonzalez confirmed grimly. "Walsh's plan was to take you to a private facility where you would have been declared mentally incompetent due to your head injury. Once that happened, anything you said about what you saw would have been dismissed as delusions." Dr. Thompson was getting angrier by the minute. "How could this happen in my hospital without my knowledge? I'm the chief of staff." Agent Gonzalez's expression softened slightly. "Dr. Thompson, we've been monitoring your communications and activities for weeks. We know you weren't involved. In fact, your genuine concern for Sarah's welfare helped convince us that she was telling the truth about what she discovered." She explained that the criminal network had been very careful to operate only during night shifts when fewer senior staff were present. They had corrupted a small number of key personnel in admissions, pharmacy, and medical records, but most of the hospital staff had no idea what was happening. "The night Sarah discovered the fake files, she wasn't supposed to be working," Agent Gonzalez continued. She had volunteered to cover for a colleague who called in sick. If she hadn't been there that particular night, the operation might have continued for months or even years. Sarah remembered that night clearly now. She had been checking on a patient in the intensive care unit when she noticed unusual activity in the medical records office. The door was supposed to be locked after hours, but she could see lights on inside. "I thought maybe someone had forgotten to log off a computer," Sarah explained to the group. "When I went to check, I found Dr. Walsh and 2 other people I didn't recognize going through patient files. They had boxes of documents and were taking photographs of everything." She had hidden in a supply closet and used her phone to take pictures of what they were doing. But they had spotted her phone's camera light, and she had run before they could catch her. "That's when I went home and started looking through the files I had access to," Sarah continued. "I found at least 12 patients whose records didn't make sense. Their medical conditions were all different, but they were all being treated with the same expensive medications, and none of them had insurance or emergency contacts." Agent Gonzalez showed her more documents on her tablet. These medications weren't actually being given to the patients. They were being diverted and sold on the black market to fund the information selling operation. It was a very sophisticated scheme. Dr. Thompson shook his head in disbelief. "And the car accident?" "No accident," Agent Gonzalez replied. "We have evidence that someone tampered with Sarah's brake lines. The plan was to kill her and make it look like an unfortunate incident. When she survived, they had to come up with another plan." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the full horror of what had been happening. Sarah had come within minutes of being permanently silenced, and without her bravery in documenting what she saw, the criminal operation would have continued. "What happens now?" Dr. Thompson asked. Agent Gonzalez explained that the FBI had been gathering evidence for weeks while keeping Sarah safe in the hospital. They had identified all the key players in the network and had warrants ready for multiple arrests across several states. "The Black Hawk helicopter brought in our evidence collection team," she said. "They're already searching Dr. Walsh's office and the medical records department. We expect to find computers, files, and communications that will help us prosecute the entire network." But the investigation was far from over. Agent Gonzalez explained that they would need Sarah's full testimony about what she had witnessed, and she would likely need to testify in court when the case went to trial. "We can offer you witness protection if you feel it's necessary," she told Sarah. This network had connections to some very dangerous criminal organizations. Sarah thought about it for a moment, then shook her head. "I'm not hiding. These people tried to kill me, and they betrayed patients who trusted the hospital to keep them safe. I want to see them all brought to justice." Agent Gonzalez smiled approvingly. "We were hoping you'd say that. Your testimony will be crucial to making sure everyone involved faces consequences for their actions." Over the next several hours, the hospital became a crime scene. FBI agents interviewed staff members, collected evidence, and began the process of identifying all the victims of the scheme. Some of the fake patients were still in the hospital and had to be moved to truly secure locations. Dr. Thompson worked closely with the agents to review every questionable case from the past 2 years. He was devastated to learn that his hospital had been used to endanger the lives of people who were already in danger. "We'll help you implement new security measures," Agent Gonzalez assured him. "This can't happen again, and we want to make sure St. Mary's becomes a model for how hospitals should protect their patients' information." As evening approached, the Black Hawk helicopter finally prepared to leave. The immediate danger was over, but Sarah knew her life would never be quite the same. She had gone from being a regular hospital nurse to being the key witness in a major federal investigation. "There's one thing I don't understand," Sarah said to Agent Gonzalez as they prepared to move her to a more secure location. "How did you know to bring the helicopter today? How did you know Dr. Walsh would try to remove me?" Agent Gonzalez smiled mysteriously. "We've been monitoring all communications related to this case. When certain people started making phone calls about moving you today, we knew they were getting desperate. The helicopter was already in the air before Dr. Walsh even arrived at the hospital." Sarah realized that she had been protected without even knowing it. Federal agents had been watching over her recovery, making sure she was safe while they built their case. "One more question," Dr. Thompson said. "How many other hospitals might be involved in something like this?" Agent Gonzalez's expression grew serious. "That's what we're hoping to find out. This investigation is just beginning, and we suspect this hospital was part of a much larger network. Your courage," she said, turning to Sarah, "might have uncovered something that goes far beyond St. Mary's." As Sarah was prepared for transport to a safe location where she could give her full statement, she looked out the window one last time at the Black Hawk helicopter. 3 weeks ago, she had been just a nurse who happened to see something suspicious. Now she was the person who had brought down a criminal conspiracy that had put innocent lives at risk. The helicopter's rotors began spinning faster as the federal agents prepared to leave. But Sarah knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a much larger investigation that would reveal the full scope of what had been happening not just at St. Mary's, but possibly at hospitals across the country. The Black Hawk lifted off into the evening sky, but the real work of bringing justice to the victims of the scheme was just getting started. 6 months after the Black Hawk helicopter landed on the roof of St. Mary's Hospital, Sarah Martinez walked into the federal courthouse wearing a navy blue suit and carrying a thick folder of documents. Today was the final day of testimony in what had become known as the Hospital Network Conspiracy, one of the largest medical fraud and witness endangerment cases in recent history. The investigation that began with Sarah's discovery had expanded far beyond anyone's initial expectations. FBI agents had uncovered a network of 17 hospitals across 8 states, all participating in the scheme to exploit and endanger witnesses in federal protection programs. Sarah's physical injuries from her attempted murder had healed completely. Her left arm was as strong as ever, and the scars on her face had faded to thin white lines that were barely noticeable. But the emotional impact of everything she had been through would stay with her forever. Dr. Thompson met her at the courthouse entrance. In the months since the investigation began, he had become not just her former supervisor, but a close friend and supporter. He had testified earlier in the week about the security failures at St. Mary's and the hospital's cooperation with federal authorities. "Ready for this?" he asked, as they walked through the metal detectors. "I've been ready since the day they tried to force me out of that hospital room," Sarah replied with determination. Inside the courtroom, she could see Dr. Walsh sitting at the defendant's table with his lawyers. He looked much older than he had 6 months ago, and his expensive suits had been replaced with standard prison clothing. When he saw Sarah enter, he quickly looked away. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case against the entire network. Dr. Walsh had been the coordinator for the operation at St. Mary's, but he was just one part of a much larger conspiracy that reached into hospitals from California to New York. Agent Gonzalez, who had become Sarah's primary contact with the FBI, was already in the courtroom. She nodded to Sarah as she took her seat in the witness section. Over the past months, Agent Gonzalez had kept Sarah informed about every development in the case. The numbers were staggering. 47 witnesses in federal protection programs had had their information compromised. 8 of them had been killed by the criminals they were hiding from. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in medications had been diverted and sold illegally, and the network had operated for almost 4 years before Sarah stumbled upon it that night. "The prosecution calls Sarah Martinez to the stand," announced the lead prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh. Sarah walked to the witness stand with confidence. She had testified twice before during the preliminary hearings, and she was no longer nervous about facing the defendants and their lawyers. She knew her testimony was crucial, not just for convicting Dr. Walsh, but for ensuring that all the victims received justice. "Ms. Martinez," Ada Walsh began, "please tell the court about the night of March 15th when you first discovered suspicious activity at St. Mary's Hospital." Sarah had told this story many times, but she knew how important it was to get every detail right. She described volunteering to work the extra shift, noticing the lights in the medical records office, and making the decision to investigate instead of just walking away. "What made you decide to document what you were seeing instead of immediately reporting it?" the prosecutor asked. "I'm a nurse," Sarah explained. "I'm trained to observe and document everything carefully before making conclusions. I wanted to make sure I had solid evidence before I accused anyone of wrongdoing." She testified about taking photographs with her phone, even though it put her in danger when the camera light was spotted. She described researching the fake patient records and discovering the pattern of fraudulent treatments and medication diversions. "Tell the court about sending the evidence to Marcus Chen," Ada Walsh continued. "Marcus is a friend from college who works for the Department of Justice," Sarah explained. "I knew he would know the right people to contact if what I found was as serious as I thought it was." She had sent the photographs and her analysis to Marcus at 2:47 a.m., just 3 hours before someone cut her brake lines in the hospital parking garage. If she had waited until morning, the evidence might have died with her. The defense attorneys tried to discredit her testimony during cross-examination, suggesting that her head injury from the attempted murder had affected her memory. But Sarah was well prepared for their attacks. "My medical records show that I had no traumatic brain injury," she responded calmly. "My memories of that night are completely clear, and they're supported by the physical evidence that was recovered." The physical evidence was overwhelming. FBI computer specialists had recovered deleted files from Dr. Walsh's computer showing communications with criminal organizations. Financial investigators had traced payments totaling over $2.3 million that had been made to network participants, and surveillance footage from other hospitals had captured similar activities at multiple locations. When Sarah finished her testimony, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For months, she had carried the burden of being the primary witness in such a large case. Now, her part was complete, and the fate of the defendants was in the hands of the jury. The trial continued for another week as the prosecution presented evidence against the other defendants. The two men who had tried to remove Sarah from the hospital, Chen and Rodriguez, had already pleaded guilty in exchange for testifying against the organizers of the network. Their testimony revealed that they were professional intimidators who had been hired to silence or eliminate witnesses who discovered the scheme. Dr. Walsh never took the stand in his own defense. His lawyers argued that he had been coerced into participating by threats against his family, but the evidence showed that he had been one of the main organizers and had personally profited significantly from the criminal activities. On a rainy Tuesday morning in October, the jury returned their verdicts. Dr. Walsh was found guilty on all counts: conspiracy, medical fraud, witness tampering, and accessory to murder. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The other defendants received sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years, depending on their level of involvement in the network. In total, 37 people were convicted in connection with the hospital network conspiracy. But for Sarah, the legal victory was only part of her story. During the months of investigation and trial preparation, she had made a life-changing decision about her future career. "I can't go back to working in a hospital like nothing happened," she had told Dr. Thompson during one of their conversations. "I need to do something that helps prevent this kind of thing from happening again." With Agent Gonzalez's recommendation, Sarah had applied to join the FBI as a specialist in medical fraud investigations. Her nursing background and her experience uncovering the hospital network made her an ideal candidate for investigating healthcare crimes. 3 months after the trial ended, Sarah graduated from the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. Agent Gonzalez was there to pin on her new badge, and Dr. Thompson flew in from the hospital to attend the ceremony. "Special Agent Martinez," Agent Gonzalez said with a smile. "How does it feel?" "It feels like I'm finally where I belong," Sarah replied. Her first assignment was to help establish new security protocols for hospitals that housed federal witnesses. Working with medical administrators and law enforcement, she helped create systems that would prevent the kind of infiltration that had occurred at St. Mary's and the other compromised hospitals. Dr. Thompson had also made changes in his own life. The experience of discovering how his hospital had been compromised had motivated him to become an advocate for stronger security measures in healthcare facilities. He now consulted with hospitals across the country, helping them identify vulnerabilities and protect patient information. "You know," he told Sarah during one of their regular phone conversations, "I think that Black Hawk helicopter landing on our roof was the best thing that ever happened to St. Mary's. It forced us to confront problems we never knew we had." The hospital had implemented comprehensive new security measures, including better background checks for staff, enhanced monitoring of patient records access, and improved protocols for reporting suspicious activities. In the year following the investigation, St. Mary's had become a model for hospital security practices. Jenny Peterson, the nurse who had refused to leave Sarah alone with Dr. Walsh, had been promoted to head of nursing security. Her quick thinking and refusal to ignore her instincts had been recognized as crucial to preventing Sarah's kidnapping. "I learned that sometimes you have to trust your gut even when authority figures tell you to back down," Jenny said during a hospital security training session. "If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong." The families of the 8 witnesses who had been killed because of the network's activities had filed wrongful death lawsuits against the hospitals and the individual conspirators. Sarah had testified in several of these civil cases, helping the families seek compensation for their devastating losses. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome for Sarah was the impact her story had on other healthcare workers. After news of the case became public, dozens of nurses, doctors, and other medical professionals came forward to report suspicious activities they had observed at their own facilities. "Healthcare workers see everything that happens in their institutions," Sarah explained during a presentation to a nursing conference. "We're often the first line of defense against fraud, abuse, and criminal activity, but we need to be trained to recognize the signs, and we need to feel safe reporting what we see." The FBI had created a new hotline specifically for healthcare workers to report suspected criminal activities in medical settings. In the first year after the hospital network case was resolved, the hotline received over 500 reports, leading to investigations at dozens of facilities across the country. Sarah often thought about how different things might have been if she had chosen to ignore the lights in the medical records office that night, or if she had decided not to investigate further when she saw Dr. Walsh and his accomplices going through patient files. 8 people who died might still be alive, dozens of witnesses might still be in danger, and a criminal network might still be operating, putting vulnerable people at risk every day. "I was just doing my job as a nurse," she would say whenever people called her a hero. "Nurses are supposed to protect their patients. I just happened to discover that some of our patients needed protection from people within the hospital itself." 2 years after the Black Hawk helicopter landed on the roof of St. Mary's Hospital, Special Agent Sarah Martinez received a commendation from the director of the FBI for her work in establishing the Healthcare Fraud Investigation Unit. The unit had successfully prosecuted criminal networks at medical facilities in 12 states, protecting hundreds of vulnerable patients and witnesses. At the commendation ceremony, Agent Gonzalez introduced Sarah to a young man named David Chen, Marcus's younger brother, who was just starting his career as a FBI analyst. "Sarah," Agent Gonzalez said, "David has been assigned to work with your unit. He's very interested in learning about medical fraud investigations." As Sarah shook hands with the eager young analyst, she remembered her own first day at the FBI Academy, when she had been nervous about whether she could make the transition from nursing to law enforcement. "The most important thing to remember," she told David, "is that every case we investigate is about protecting people who can't protect themselves. Whether they're patients in a hospital or witnesses hiding from dangerous criminals, our job is to make sure they're safe. She looked out the window of the FBI building toward the city beyond, thinking about all the hospitals, clinics, and medical facilities where dedicated healthcare workers were taking care of patients and watching out for anything that might put those patients at risk. Somewhere out there, another nurse or doctor might be working a late shift and noticing something suspicious. They might be facing the same choice Sarah had faced that night, whether to investigate further or just walk away. Sarah hoped that when that moment came, they would choose to investigate. Because sometimes, the difference between justice and tragedy comes down to one person's willingness to ask questions when something doesn't seem right. The Black Hawk helicopter that had appeared on the hospital roof that day had brought more than just federal agents. It had brought the beginning of systemic change in how healthcare facilities protect their most vulnerable patients. And it had launched Sarah on a career dedicated to ensuring that hospitals remain places of healing and safety, not exploitation and danger. As she walked back to her office to review case files for the next investigation, Sarah smiled, knowing that her decision to investigate those lights in the medical records office had made a difference that would protect people for years to come.